The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely delighted today to stand in the House and say a few words about the budget, Mr. Speaker. And I understand that I have a full hour to speak, and I'm delighted about that, Mr. Speaker. It's hard to talk about such a tremendous budget that we have in this province today in sound bites or in a minute in QP. So I'm delighted to have this opportunity, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Newfoundland and Labrador, as we all know, is a wonderful place to live and to raise our families. That's always been true, Mr. Speaker. We've always felt that way, whether times were good or whether they were tough. And Mr. Speaker, for a significant part of the past 500 years has been pretty tough. It's not been easy. Now, Mr. Speaker, as most people know, I grew up in a little village on the south coast, Mr. Speaker. One of 11 children, my mother and father, at a time when there weren't many social programs, Mr. Speaker. So you had to be self-sufficient, you had to be innovative, you had to be hard-working to raise a family, and especially to raise a family of that size, Mr. Speaker. It was no small feat to get us all raised up, clothed and fed and educated, Mr. Speaker, and sent out into the world on our own. And as I've said here in this House many times, the first 5 siblings, I'm the middle child. I have 5 on either side of me. The forgotten one, Mr. Speaker. The first 5, Mr. Speaker, went off to the mainland to earn their fortunes. And the reason they did that was not because they weren't passionate about this place, not because they didn't want to stay close to their family and friends, not because they didn't want to stay close to their roots, Mr. Speaker, but because of the lack of opportunity that was available to them in this province. Mr. Speaker, how times have changed. How times have changed, Mr. Speaker. Because young people now who finish their education in our communities have a choice about whether they stay or go. And the most significant part of that change in circumstances, that change in the dynamics of Newfoundland and Labrador, has occurred within the last 10 years. And Mr. Speaker, some of those changes have been facilitated because of windfalls. There is no question about that, Mr. Speaker. Nobody is going to argue that the rise in oil prices have not had a significant impact on the economy in Newfoundland and Labrador. But Mr. Speaker, if you look back over our history, if you look back over the budgets of governments over the years, Mr. Speaker, it hasn't been a lack of funds that's been the critical problem, Mr. Speaker, because we spent money in this province whether we had it or whether we didn't. And our debt that we carry around with us today, Mr. Speaker, is testimony to that. So we were spending money, Mr. Speaker. We weren't spending it very well. We weren't making wise choices. We didn't have a good fiscal management plan for this province. We didn't have a vision for this province, Mr. Speaker. We didn't understand the threats, the weaknesses, nor the opportunities, Mr. Speaker. And that whole piece started to change in 2003. There is no question about it, Mr. Speaker. And we've come a long, long way since then, Mr. Speaker, and I'm so proud to have been a part of it. Mr. Speaker, but I believe the best is yet to come. We're just getting our feet under us, Mr. Speaker. There is so much opportunity in this province, and only day by day by day, as we do the work, Mr. Speaker, as we do the research, as we make the correct investments, Mr. Speaker, do we even begin to realize what lies in front of us. One of the most exciting opportunities we have, Mr. Speaker, is in our human potential. I am so thrilled, Mr. Speaker, when I speak to companies all over the world and they talk about our young people, how intelligent, how bright, how capable, their work ethic, Mr. Speaker, their training from our higher learning institutions, such as Memorial University, the College of the North Atlantic, the Marine Institute, and so on, Mr. Speaker, and the great work that is being done in the private sector in terms of readying our young people for the workforce. Mr. Speaker, next week I'll be in Houston to the Offshore Technology Conference, where I'll meet with oil companies and be in support of our delegation of companies in service and supply sector to the offshore particularly, who will be down there marketing their goods and their skills, Mr. Speaker. And I will guarantee you that this year, like year after year previous to this, I will receive so many accolades about the quality of service, the quality of young people who come to work in companies all over the world, and the return that they give to those companies, and the return they give to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Speaker. And that's why it is so important that we continue on our path of good fiscal management. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to go into the big litany again of the deficits we had in 2003, Mr. Speaker. Everyone in this province is very familiar with them, Mr. Speaker. It was a daily litany of woe from all parts of the province, whether it was people having to leave their homes and their communities and whole regions of their province, Mr. Speaker, about dialysis, Mr. Speaker, or lack of hospitals, schools, roads. The litany and the list went on and on and on. And Mr. Speaker, if we were going to drive our economy, whether we were going to have companies invest in this province, Mr. Speaker, whether or not we were going to be able to attract doctors and nurses and engineers and the people we needed to drive that economy in this province, we knew we had to make investments. We had to have decent roads. We had to have decent roads, Mr. Speaker, to support a growing economy. We had to have schools. We had to have hospitals if we were going to attract professionals to different regions of our province. If they were coming to work, if young scientists are coming to work in the aquaculture industry on the South Coast, Mr. Speaker, they need to know that their children are going to have a quality education. They need to know that they have access to quality health care, that they have access to recreation. That is all as important as any other element in growing our economy. And so we knew we had to make significant investments, and we did, Mr. Speaker. And the stars aligned with us, Mr. Speaker, when oil prices rose dramatically. And we were able to take that extra money and make the appropriate investments, not only in terms of the infrastructure, the bills that were required, the services that were required, but also in terms of our public service, for example, Mr. Speaker. Because the first round of negotiations that we became involved in 2004, we didn't have much to offer to the public service, Mr. Speaker. But in our last round of negotiations, we put $500 million a year on the table for our public service, and it was a good thing to do, Mr. Speaker. None of us regret doing it. So, Mr. Speaker, we've come a long way. And it saddens me. It saddens me, I have to tell you, that when I look at TV or I go to a movie and I have to sit through a negative ad talking about how terrible things are in this place, and if we're a have province, a whole warping of what it means to be have or have not, Mr. Speaker, a whole twisting of the meaning. There's never been a better time. We have never had more employment in our province than we have at the moment. Mr. Speaker, we have the highest wages being paid in the country, Mr. Speaker, right here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We have people coming home from all over the world to work here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Met one of them last night working on Muskrat Falls. How thrilled to be home from Alberta working in Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Speaker. We have great schools, we have great hospitals, we have great infrastructure, and, Mr. Speaker, we're paying for it ourselves. We are paying for it ourselves. No more poor cousins. No more poor cousins. We're leading the way in this country, Mr. Speaker. Leading the way. We have some of the highest investment in the country happening in Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Speaker. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens from good, sound planning. And what does it mean when you're a have? It means you can pay your own bills. You can pay your own bills. I had a group of high school students in here visiting not too long ago, and we talked about have and have not. And I said to them, you're in university, you're living at home. Mom and Dad are putting the roof over your head and putting the food on the table. They're probably paying your tuition fees. You've got a part-time job that's helping supplement your education costs, and you might be buying your own clothing or doing a few things other than that. But when you graduate and go out, you move from that have-not status because you are not able to take care of your own needs. You move from that have-not status to have because you're able to pay for your own accommodation. You're able to buy your own food. You can make a payment on a car. Doesn't mean that your first car is going to be a BMW or a Jag. Doesn't mean you're going to go buy a mansion. But it means, and there's nothing wrong to aspire to all of that. Absolutely. Who wouldn't want a Jag? Who wouldn't want to aspire to fine living? Who wouldn't want to aspire to all kinds of things? And that's all, that opportunity exists for you. But where you are now is you're looking after your own needs. You're independent, you're stood on your own 2 feet, and by goodness, if Mom and Dad need some help, you can offer that as well. Now that's what it means to be have. That's what it means to be have. We're stood on our own 2 feet in this province. We are paying our way. And we're building a thriving economy that will bring more benefits, more services to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. That's a good thing. Do we have everything we aspire to at the moment? Can we buy everything that we want? Can we go and do things that we would all like to see in place? Not yet. Not yet, Mr. Speaker. But we're going to get there. We're absolutely going to get there. And one of the ways we're going to get there is by being fiscally prudent, being absolutely fiscally prudent. So we always knew the day was going to come when we had to ramp back our spending. There's only 500,000 of us. The other piece that we needed to take into account is where does our revenue come from? Where's it coming from? So 30-odd% of it is coming from the offshore, Mr. Speaker. Some of it is coming from the fishery. Some of it is coming from mining, Mr. Speaker. These are important industries. We're growing our information and innovation sectors, Mr. Speaker. We're starting to get better returns. We're building a legacy in terms of our service and supply sector, a legacy that will be there long after oil is gone, that we can market to the rest of the world. And the bulk of what we do in this province is funded from the revenue that comes from these natural resources that we have here in the province. In terms of taxes, Mr. Speaker, we try to shield as many taxpayers as we can in this province. And we have some of the lowest taxes in Atlantic Canada, Mr. Speaker. But 70% of our taxes, our personal income tax in this province, are being paid by 20% of the population. The 20% that are young professionals, young people, young families that have recently graduated from university, have mortgages, have car payments, have child care costs, Mr. Speaker, and who are driving the economy. There are doctors, our nurses, our engineers, our lawyers, our trades and technology people, the people who are driving the economy, who are at a time in their life where they have a lot of burden on them at the moment. in terms of what they need to meet their own family needs. But they're paying 70% of the personal income tax in this province. 80% of the people are sheltered from those taxes. And they're sheltered for good reason, because they still have some catch up to do in incomes, or they're seniors and have worked hard and contributed to this province and so on. So we're not in a place where we're prepared to increase the burden on the 20%, and we continue to be in a place where we want to shield the 80% as much as we can, because they're not in a place that can take a whole lot of pressure tax-wise. That's not what we want to do as a government. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are some in this House who advocate on a daily basis for us to spend. Shocking. Mr. Speaker, they also advocate for us to tax. Ridiculous. And I want to tell the people on the other side of the House, particularly the NDP, that is not where we're going. That is not where we're going. Mr. Speaker, we continue to make strategic investments in our offshore, to grow our offshore, to build up our prospectivity, because there are still many benefits lying out there under the ocean floor for us to harvest, Mr. Speaker. And in every oil project where we have negotiated, we have generated more and more and more revenue and benefits for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we're going to continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to do it in a wise way. And we're going to do it in a comprehensive way, Mr. Speaker. Recently we had the leader of the NDP throwing out corporate tax rates as a way of raising money from the offshore, and that we should be driving rates up to as high as 78% on profit, because she heard somewhere that that's what happens in the offshore, for example, in Norway. Very dangerous, Mr. Speaker. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. One thing that we made a commitment to when we formed government back in 2003, that we would never go to any negotiating table unless we were well armed with knowledge, that we understood the issue we were negotiating as well or better than the people who were sitting across the table from us. And Mr. Speaker, we have looked at every industrial benefits arrangement in the world. We've looked at every royalty arrangement in the world, every corporate tax arrangement in the world with oil companies. We've looked at countries that have state-owned oil companies. We've looked at countries that just invite entrepreneurs in there to develop resources, Mr. Speaker. And we have taken the elements of those arrangements and come up with the best arrangement in Newfoundland and Labrador. So yes, they do charge 78% corporate income tax in Norway, but in Norway they also fund all the exploration costs, or pretty much all the exploration costs that the companies have before they find oil. Wow. So if a company drills 6 wells and they all come up dry, tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars of liability for the people of Norway, on which there's no return. No return. So if a company spends hundreds of millions of dollars, they can write off practically all of that money. Norway will take responsibility for it. So when they do strike oil, the government comes to them and says, we'll take 78% of your profit now, thank you very much. Well, I suppose they would. I absolutely suppose they would. If you had taken all the risk, you had been responsible in some way or other for all the costs, I guess you're going to come in and get your benefits on the other side of it. And good for Norway. We don't have any issue with that. But we don't have the same prospectivity here yet as they do in Norway. Yeah. And we're not going to expose the people of Newfoundland and Labrador to that kind of risk with no guarantee of return. Not doing it. Not doing it. So we have negotiated with companies to say that when you strike oil, now you come talk to us. Now you come talk to us. And before you get a license to develop that oil, we're going to talk about profit sharing. And that profit sharing, we're going to take it in a royalty regime. We're going to take it in corporate taxes. We're going to take it in industrial benefits that says engineering has to be done here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Modules have to be built here in Newfoundland and Labrador. People have to be hired here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we make sure that our benefits match or exceed any other regime in the world. It is well informed, and it is comprehensive, and it brings magnificent benefits to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we don't go off half-cocked over on this side of the house, because that's happened too much in our history, and we've paid too high a cost for it. That's right. And yes, sometimes we do engage in high-risk activity. I just heard the former speaker get up and talk about the forestry industry and the fact that we haven't invested in the forestry industry. Well, let me tell you, we've had a $28 million forestry diversification fund that we delivered over the last 5 years. Hear, hear, hear. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, not only in terms of forestry, but in terms of any kind of business development that has to come to the province to look for funding. So this is our whole suite of business programming. Mr. Speaker, they come to us for a reason. They come to us because there's risk associated with what it is they're doing. Risk that the bank won't undertake. If people can get funding from banks to support their business plans, they don't need to come to government. But you'd have to have some kind of a plan in forestry in the last 10 years to go get any endorsement from a bank. Listen to that. But the government stepped up. Not only did we step up with Abitibi, and we put a lot of money into Abitibi and would have considered further investment, but they decided to pack their bags and go. So we had to get from Abitibi what we could before they were gone out the door, and somebody from New York owned the water assets and the forestry assets. That's right. And I saw some remarks in the media today about the cost of us expropriating, for example, the generation assets on the Exploits River. But let me remind everybody in this house and out that that's a revenue generating asset. And what we paid Fortis and NL was fair market value. If we were going to go build that today, that's what we'd have to spend. But that asset is generating money right now to pay for the cost that it took for us to acquire it and to make Fortis and NL whole. A commitment we made the day we expropriated the properties in Grand Falls, that we would make Fortis and NL whole, and everybody agreed to it. Everybody agreed to it. And this week we were able to put the final signature to that commitment to those, because on this side of the house, our word is our bond. It means we don't do bad deals with people. We know what a bad deal does to relationships. We don't want anything to do with it. We're subject to one that poisons just about every interaction we have. We're not going there. We're ethical people, and we're going to conduct our business in an ethical way. So we kept NL and Fortis whole, and we have their asset, and that asset is earning money every day, and it will pay us back the money we had to pay Fortis and NL, and then it will generate millions of dollars for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, including the people of Grand Falls, Windsor. And we don't need any exhortations from from anybody across the aisle to talk to the people in Grand Falls, Windsor, to see what they feel. Because we got an MHA, 2 MHA, 3 MHA that represent that area of the province, who are there on a daily basis or a weekly basis when the house is open, who come back and talk to us all the time about what the people in Grand Falls, Windsor, and exploits and the other Green Bay South feel about the expropriation of the assets and economic opportunities there. I spend a lot of time there. Ministers spend a lot of time there. So we understand very clearly what their aspirations are. And we have worked with them from day one and will continue to work with them. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, because of their own good efforts and the support they have from government, that they're doing as well as they are today, and they are doing well. But, Mr. Speaker, so in terms of forestry, Mr. Speaker, doing anything in forestry is high risk. And we try very hard to develop, and we're still continuing to work hard, to develop a pellet industry in this province, Mr. Speaker. So they say, do something in forestry, it's high risk. But at the same time, when we make a significant investment in Roddington, in an area of the province that is represented by the MHA making the complaint, he chastises us on a regular basis for having made that commitment in his area of the province that has employed, I might say, hundreds of people over the last number of years. Kept harvesters going, Mr. Speaker, have had people working in the yard and so on. Before that, I might say to you, one of your great supporters would call on us on a regular basis to put money into forestry on the Northern Peninsula, to bring wood, to pay them. So we would pay Corner Brook Pulp and Paper to take the wood from the Northern Peninsula to use in the mill, even though they didn't need it. And in terms of the investment in Wholesome, we're trying to get that to a different place. We're trying to take the high-risk investment to get that to a place where it can stand on its own 2 feet, Mr. Speaker. And if you're going to help somebody in forestry, and you're going to have to help somebody in forestry, Mr. Speaker, they're the kind of risks you take. But you work hard with your partners to make sure that you get a good business plan, that you clearly understand the risks, that there are acceptable risks that you're going to take, and what else can you do to mitigate that risk. But eventually you know that any investment you're making, there's a risk in it that you're going to lose your money, that you're not going to get return on your investment. But when it comes to the people in Newfoundland and Labrador, I'm prepared to take the risk. My government is prepared to take the risk. And it doesn't hurt. You know, when we talked about Muskrat Falls, the same member got up here and he talked about burning biomass. And I told him I was going to say a few words about biomass. But I have to say it, Mr. Speaker, because it is incumbent on all of us at least to have a basic understanding of what it is that we're talking about when we get up here in the House of Assembly and advocate certain positions. Mr. Speaker, when pulp and paper companies, when integrated sawmillers are harvesting saw logs and pulp wood in our forests, we have to say to them, you can't take out the biomass. You got to leave the boughs, you got to leave the stumps, you got to leave it all in the forest, on the floor of the forest so it can decay and go back and nourish the soil. We have our research. We understand what it is we're doing here. The quality of our soil is so poor in Newfoundland and Labrador that even if we were to do whole tree harvesting in this province, we would lose our forestry within 2 generations. But our friend across the way wants to keep Holyrood going. So we would have, what are we going to do? In 2 generations of growth, the forests have begun, and where are we going then with Holyrood? That must be the new technology that they're talking about. But I suppose, but in all fairness, he did have a fallback plan. He did have a fallback plan, Mr. Speaker. He was going to burn shrimp shells. He was going to do shrimp shells for 500 megawatts of electricity to replace Holyrood, Mr. Speaker.
Shrimp shells.
But, Mr. Speaker, we are at a place, as I said, that is enviable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, the key economic indicators say it all. We got total capital investment growth of $9.7 billion. I hear groans from the other side. They can't stand hearing it, Mr. Speaker. They can't stand it. We have almost 4,000 housing starts, Mr. Speaker, the highest level in over 35 years. Mr. Speaker, retail sales are up. New cars are on track to post the highest number of cars ever sold in this province. Employment, as I said, is at a record high. Investments at a record high. Earnings are at a record high, Mr. Speaker. And investment by government is at a record high, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, as we ramp back our spending and we're off equalisation, the Atlantic Accord has finished its payments, Mr. Speaker. We've given $500 million tax relief to the people of this province, Mr. Speaker, over the last number of years. There are a number of reasons. Our reserves are declining, so we need to get more prospectivity in our offshore, Mr. Speaker, firm up our reserves. But, Mr. Speaker, until all of that happens, we need to be careful about what we're doing. We can't be tying up hundreds of millions of dollars in debt payments, Mr. Speaker. In debt. And let me talk about debt for a minute. Debt, everybody, you know, reckless spending by the government. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, almost $6 billion of our current debt has to do with the unfunded liability in our pension plan and our post-retirement liabilities. $6 billion. $6 billion. Not spent by the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. Unfunded liabilities in our pension plan. And that's with an investment of almost $4 billion over the last number of years into the pension plan. Just imagine if we hadn't put the $4 billion into the investment plan. But that's why we've got to talk to people in the labour movement. We've got to talk to the union heads. You know, I heard one of them say they paid off their other debt. They didn't pay off the debt. Of the unfunded liability. $4 billion went into the unfunded liability. $4 billion went in there, I say, to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. But you don't have, and we don't have, $4 billion to put in there every 4 years. You say hands off our pension plan? We go hands off your pension plan, it's going to go bankrupt. We have to talk. We have to work together to find a way forward, to protect the benefits that you negotiated, that were promised to you. One way or another, there has to be some protection of those benefits on a go-forward basis, and not talking about it is not an option, Mr. Speaker. It is not an option for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, because we don't have billions and billions and billions of dollars every year to put into the unfunded liability. Don't have it. So we got to talk about that, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, and we make strategic, so we got to talk about new ways of earning money, Mr. Speaker, of beefing up the revenue in the Treasury. Because outside of here, economically, we're the envy of the country. I just came back from CAP. You know, when I sit with my colleagues in Atlantic Canada, any one of them would trade places with Newfoundland and Labrador. And not to say that we don't have challenges. Absolutely we have challenges. There's a long ways to go yet. But we're well on our way there. We're getting there piece by piece by piece. And we're in a really, really good place. But we have to find new ways to generate revenue for our Treasury. And that's why we invested in our own provincially owned energy company, Nalcor. Now, Mr. Speaker, this year we put $30 million, for example, into Nalcor for geoscience, because we're getting mature in this oil and gas business now, Mr. Speaker. We're learning more. We're getting more confidence with each successful project, with each successful negotiation, as we see the benefits pay back to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. We're getting more and more confident. We're getting more information. We've got great people all around us, particularly in Nalcor, who have a deep, penetrating knowledge of this industry, what's happening here in this country and around the world. So up to this point, like many other places in the world, we have said to companies, you do your own geoscience, and when the time comes for nomination, you nominate what lands that you'd like to see being put up for sale. And then we'll have a bidding process. And that's what's happened here for the last number of years. So they don't share that data with us. We don't know what the prospectivity is of these basins. And there's only a single criteria, which in the land sales was the highest bidder wins the land sale. So we're not always sure if we've got the best return on our land sale, although it's in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. We took a new tack in the mining sector with Julian Lake, which is a great ore deposit in Labrador. And people were interested in being able to access that body of ore. But before we did it, we said, why don't we take some money, spend it, like firm up the reserve, see how big it is, see what the quality of it is, and take a new approach when we go out to companies around the world and ask them to develop this and bring benefit to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. And it was a really wise decision. The ore was a lot better than we thought it was. The field was a lot larger. The deposit was a lot larger than we believed it to be. And we're able to institute a whole new process to give greater value, particularly in Labrador, to the people of Labrador, but to the province as a whole. And now we've undertaken the same process. So Labrador, we've had some interest in Labrador, and there was some interest in land sales last year and so on. So they started to be nominated again, first time in 30 years. And we said, hang on a second here now. We know a little bit about the gas plays in Labrador because that's all we've seen up there so far. And general knowledge says, and the general scuttlebutt in the industry says, that's all that's up there, because once you come off the continental shelf, you're going to be down into the Earth's crust, and that's not known for high prospectivity and so on. And you know, Nalcor, in its own wisdom, said, well, why don't we test that a little bit? And so they took $30 million to invest in seismic work in Labrador. With that, they took $15 million to go directly on the seismic vessel to go out and study the geography. That $15 million leveraged another $65 million from the company that they were partnered with, and the other $15 million was used to analyze the data. The data is really interesting. It is very interesting, Mr. Speaker. It is so good that a number of people are vying for access to the data. So we've just about recovered the $30 million from license fees to look at the data. And right now another 16 companies have applied to access the data, which will start to be clear profit just on the data. Hear, hear, hear. But that's not the... So all the money has been recovered and leveraged out another $65 million. But what's the most exciting part of that is the information that we have. That's not crust, there's oil. There's oil under them waters, Mr. Speaker. And when I'm so excited to be going to Houston to the oil show this week, because I'm going to be talking to those companies, and they're lining up. They're lining up. But we're not going to move quickly, Mr. Speaker. We're going to be steady and sure, do our research, and make sure that whatever decisions we make on activity, not only in the Labrador basins, because we'll run it right down, everything down to Jeanne d'Arc, that we maximise benefit. And already we know that billions upon billions of dollars will come to the people of this province as a result of that work. So that's what $30 million investment in Nalcor does for the people of the province. We knew what we were doing when we built our own provincially owned oil and gas company, our own energy company. We are tired of other people mining our resources. And even though our returns are better now than they have ever been in our history, Mr. Speaker, they can be better still. And we're going to make that happen. So you're never going to find anybody on this side of the House apologising for our investment in Nalcor, Mr. Speaker, because every investment we have made in Nalcor has paid off in billions of dollars and potentially billions more for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. Mr. Speaker, by our equity investments alone in Hibernia Southern Extension, in Terra Nova and White Rose, we will be fully funded to do all of the work that we're committed to in Nalcor by 2015-2017. Mr. Speaker, that money will be recovered and earning more money for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. Billions and billions of dollars. So no, Mr. Speaker, we don't want an easy out. Our philosophy is not spend, 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 and then tax, 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 because there hasn't been one other idea come across the floor of this House of Assembly. Every time anybody talks about diversification in this province, you know, for example, aquaculture industry, we have rebuilt with investors and the people of the south coast of Newfoundland, we have rebuilt the whole economy in the Fortune and Conagra peninsulas. Fortune Bay, Bay d'Espoir, the Conagra Peninsula. And we hear the Liberals on a regular basis condemn the aquaculture industry and want to close down the aquaculture industry, but we don't get any comfort from the NDP either. They don't offer any comfort to any company who's listening and who's considering investment on the south coast of Newfoundland, Mr. Speaker. They don't get any comfort from the other side of the House that the millions of dollars that they want to invest in southern Newfoundland will work for them and work for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. They're fearful. I mean, they listen very carefully to what goes on here, and they're fearful of the crack across the neck that gets talked about on a pretty regular basis in this House. I expect oil companies, Mr. Speaker, because in generating revenue, we didn't hear any talk about economic diversification from the NDP. They talked about in their platform a 3% surcharge on operating oil companies in our offshore. Now talk about ethical dealings with people. When people come and invest hundreds of millions of dollars in your province, in your economy, the only thing that I have ever heard oil companies say to the people of this province through their government is, tell us what the rules are. Give us clarity. Tell us what you expect from us. Tell us what the laws are. Tell us how much return that you expect and the benefits. Let's negotiate remedies if things go off the skids so we know we got a dispute resolution process available to us, but lay it all out so we have clarity, so that when we convince our companies to make this investment in Newfoundland and Labrador, we've got the whole picture and we have negotiated in good faith. We understand everything that you require of us, and we commit fully to give you just that, and we're going to sign legally binding documents to that effect. Blood runs a little cold when they hear about a party in this province who's seeking to form government the first thing they're going to do is go out and through an act of the legislature, override all of those agreements and put a 3% surcharge. Anybody considering a new investment in Newfoundland and Labrador got to be thinking about it hard. Got to be thinking about it hard. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, in this world, and in this world today particularly, there are a lot of people looking for investment. There are a lot of countries crying out for investment, saying, come here, come here, come here. Our people are unemployed, we're in a desperate circumstance, we've got a great resource, we want you to invest here. Now, Mr. Speaker, when you come here, there is going to be a clear set of rules, and there is going to be a fair return to the people of the province. And we're going to maximise value to the people of the province right from the very beginning in the licensing of the data, from your first peek into the seismic data where you can see prospectivity, right up to the point that you develop the oil wells and start to bring oil out of the ground. There is going to be benefits for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador at every level, and we're going to continue to maximise that, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, when we're doing that, we're going to do it in a fair and equitable way. And through investments in our offshore, like I just talked about with the development of Muskrat Falls, Mr. Speaker, and we do these same kinds of negotiations with mining industry. When you're doing a mine, you make sure that we maximise benefits. And our friends, the Liberals across the way, Mr. Speaker, they're very proud of the deal that they negotiated in 2002 with Vale. And so they should be. So they should be, Mr. Speaker, in all fairness. They negotiated a deal. We had a great deal of problems with it at the time because we thought there were weaknesses in it. But they got the fundamental deal. But there was a problem, Mr. Speaker, that we saw as a major, major failing in that 2002 agreement that they made with Vale. And, Mr. Speaker, we got an opportunity in 2009 because the company was not able to meet its legislated deadline on its development plan. And because it didn't, we were able to reopen certain parts of the contract. And we did a number of things. But the most important issue we did was deal with the force majeure clause. And that's what we had talked about in 2002. That was where the Mack truck could drive through that agreement. Because a force majeure clause is a legal undertaking that allows the company to be relieved of its responsibilities if there's something huge happens, like an act of God or some big major event that the company doesn't have any control over. But that's not what the force majeure clause in the Vale agreement said at all, Mr. Speaker. In the force majeure clause that was negotiated in 2002, you could stop the project or delay the project because of a delay or failure of suppliers of labour, transportation, materials, machinery, equipment, parts, supplies, utilities, or services, contractors or subcontractors shortage, or an inability to obtain labour, transportation, materials, machinery, equipment, parts, supplies, utilities or services, or breakdown of equipment, machinery or facilities. Mr. Speaker, Vale could have stopped the project in Long Harbour for any reason under the sun. They could have put their hands up and walked away at any time. Any time. For almost any reason. It was a major, major weakness in the agreement. So people ask, where's the loophole that the Mack truck could go through? There it was. There it was. But when we were able to reopen the development plan in 2007, Mr. Speaker, we closed the loophole. The loophole was closed. All of those provisions were taken out, and a normal force majeure clause is put in. That's how the interests of the people of this province are protected, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, there was never any commitment to go underground. What the 2002 agreement required the company to do was spend about $85 million exploring going underground, Mr. Speaker. That's all they were required to do. But last year, we had another opportunity to reopen the contract because of delays in the building of the plant, and we were able to secure underground development of a mine, which is critical to the people of Labrador. So, Mr. Speaker, not only do you negotiate new deals and better deals for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador that relieves the tax burden on them, Mr. Speaker, which is able to provide the solid services they need on a daily basis, but we're able to grow the services that we provide to them. But, Mr. Speaker, you also look for every opportunity, legally and within the confines of the agreement, to improve agreements that we already have, Mr. Speaker. And that's what we do as a government. And when we get that money, we make investments. We make investments, Mr. Speaker, like $2.9 million in health spending, $1.3 million in education, $185 million to support children and families, more than $366 million again this year to advance infrastructure, $230 million to support strong, safe and sustainable communities, $149 million, Mr. Speaker, in the poverty reduction strategy, $100 million still in tax credits and incentives for businesses. So where's the reckless spending? Where's the squandering, I ask, Mr. Speaker? These are solid investments in the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. Don't apologize for any of them, Mr. Speaker. And yes, and while we make significant investments in housing, do we need more? Absolutely. Mr. Speaker, even though we make significant investments in childcare, do we need more? Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. We need more investments in early childhood education, and that's the place to start. When we get to all-day kindergarten, and we'll get to all-day kindergarten, our children will be able to take full advantage of it, Mr. Speaker, because they have been helped along that continuum of education by our early childhood education initiatives. Can we do it all today? Not all today. We can't do it all today, but it's a progression, Mr. Speaker. It's like coming off half-knot as a university student and coming into the have world. You know, when you first start off, the burden can be really heavy when you got to pay your student loans, and you got to buy a house, and you got to buy a car, and there are other investments that you need to make. You don't have as much disposable income to do other things, Mr. Speaker, and we're much the same way. We've come off half-knot, and we're slowly but surely making our way forward. But we're going to do it. We're going to do it in a prudent way, Mr. Speaker. We're going to do it in a way that works for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to run the debt clock up as high as it can go and then tie up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in debt payments, Mr. Speaker, because nobody gives you money for free. Nobody gives you money for free. You pay. And if I'm paying down interest on money we owe, you can't invest that in education and health care and infrastructure and daycare and those kinds of things. So we have to be prudent. So we had to take some measures. But also, we're evolving and maturing as a people and as a province. It's prudent from time to time to review how you deliver services and to make sure that the people of the province are getting the value of every nickel we spend. Because we're called to do that kind of stewardship. And sometimes there's negative fallout as a result of that. With new technology, new way of doing things, new ways of delivering programs, Mr. Speaker, sometimes there's a human impact in terms of having to let people go. And anybody who has ever heard me speak about the public service in my public life here in government in the last 10 years knows that I have the ultimate respect and appreciation of our public service. It is second to none in this country. I am so proud when I go to federal, provincial, territorial meetings to be supported by my public service and our public service. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have every right to be so proud of the people who work for them day out, day in and day out. And it takes a special kind of person to be a public servant. They don't ever look for accolades or honour or some kind of recognition of their work, Mr. Speaker. I've heard them described across the way as fat cats and all kinds of hacks. And you know, that's not our public service. That's not the public service I work with every day. And Mr. Speaker, you know, they work tirelessly. And their work is rarely acknowledged and even more rarely honoured. And we as a government try to do that as often as we can because we're proud of the work that they do for us. But Mr. Speaker, when you start to review programs, when you start to have new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things, sometimes there's negative impacts. And it's painful. It's not an easy thing to do, to say goodbye to anybody when they're going out the door, even when they're going of their own accord. It's difficult because you're doing a special kind of work together. It's a special calling in a lot of ways to be in service to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. And so it's difficult. So nobody on this side of the House found it easy. And we tried to do that transition as thoughtfully and as respectfully as we could. But it was absolutely necessary, Mr. Speaker. And the comfort in it, if there was any comfort in it, Mr. Speaker, was that we have such a thriving economy. There's such a need for workers in this province, and we know how highly skilled our public service is. There was comfort in knowing that there was opportunity beyond the doors of Confederation Building for these people. And not to say that some people won't fall through the cracks, Mr. Speaker, but we'll try to be there for them. We never walk away from Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, in good times or in bad times. More important that we be there in bad times. And in the same way we said to the people of Stephenville, the same way we said to the people of Grand Falls, the same way we said to the people on the Conagra Peninsula. We don't always have all the answers right away when a storm hits, but we're here. And we're not going anywhere. We're going to walk every step of this journey with you. And together we're going to find solutions. And we're going to make sure that everybody is okay. And we're going to make it our best effort. And we're doing a really good job of that. Now, in terms of 500,000 people, can you come in here with a list of stories of people who have a serious circumstance, a circumstance where they feel helpless and out of control, that they're being overwhelmed by certain circumstances, whether it's in healthcare or education or in housing? Absolutely can. We don't live in utopia. We're not standing up here and arguing that there is not one person in Newfoundland and Labrador who's not challenged. What we're saying to people, though, is we're your government, we're listening to what it is that you're saying, and we understand that extraordinary circumstances exist in people's lives. Come to us and we're going to try to work with you to resolve those issues. We can't anticipate them all, but when you come to our door, you won't get turned away. So, Mr. Speaker, my time, how quickly an hour passes, Mr. Speaker, because I could do with another hour, and maybe I'll get one somewhere along the line, Mr. Speaker. And I want to talk about this place and how wonderful. The sky is not falling, Mr. Speaker. The bottom hasn't fallen out of Newfoundland and Labrador, not by a long shot, despite what they say on the other side of the aisle. Mr. Speaker, there's never been a better time to live in Newfoundland and Labrador. There has never been more opportunity than there is in Newfoundland and Labrador at this time, Mr. Speaker. And the future, Mr. Speaker, has never been as bright as it is today. And I'm so proud to be part of a government, to work with the people that I'm surrounded by here today, with the support of the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, to do the very best we can do to make this place all that we know it can be.